The old man fell for it completely. I froze, my hand just inches from the study door. That was my nephew, Mark, on the phone, bragging. He wasn't planning to use my $50,000 for a business startup. No, he was going to buy a flashy sports car and laugh all the way to the dealership. My own flesh and blood. But I didn't get angry. I just smiled. The next day, I handed Mark a thick manila folder, not a check. "Son," I said, my voice steady. "Cash is temporary, but an opportunity, that's forever." I told him I'd arranged a far better investment for him, a majority stake in a promising new venture, up north. 3 days later, my phone rings. The connection is crackly, and I can hear the faint sound of seagulls and a boat horn. It's Mark. He's not in a car dealership. He's standing on a fishing dock in Kodiak, Alaska, in a pair of borrowed rubber waders. Now, before I tell you the 3 words he screamed at me over that satellite phone, let me ask you something. What's the best piece of advice your own parents or grandparents ever gave you? Go ahead and share it in the comments. The day my mother, Eleanor, passed away, the world simply went silent. It is a strange thing, isn't it? How a planet with billions of people can suddenly feel like an empty, echoing room, just because one heart stopped beating. My mother was my rock. She was my very best friend. More than that, she was the only person who truly, deeply understood the person I was, behind the mask I wore for the rest of the world. Growing up in our small house on Oak Street, I watched her handle everything with a kind of grace that you just don't see much anymore. She was a woman of the old school, meticulous, disciplined, and incredibly sharp. I remember, so clearly, our Friday evenings. Most people my age were out at the movies or at a dance, but I loved sitting at the kitchen table with her. She would make a pot of Earl Grey tea, the steam rising in thin curls under the warm yellow light of the kitchen. She would pull out her heavy, leather-bound ledger. She didn't trust computers for her personal finances. Not entirely. She would say to me, "Emily, honey, a woman must always know where every single penny is hiding. Integrity isn't just about telling the truth. It is about being responsible for what you have built." She taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was only 12 years old. She showed me the importance of a well-managed retirement fund. And because of her influence, I ended up working for a private wealth management firm. I followed in her footsteps in a way. I became a woman who understood the language of numbers and the weight of a signed document. But when she died, all those numbers meant nothing. The silence in her house was heavy. It was a thick, suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb every sound. I would walk into her room and expect to hear the soft rustle of her newspaper or the clicking of her knitting needles. But there was nothing, just the scent of her lavender perfume lingering in the air, a ghost of a life that had been so vibrant just days before. I felt like a ship that had lost its anchor in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane. I was drifting. I was numb. My mother was the person I called when I had good news, and she was the first person I called when my world was falling apart. Now, there was no one at the other end of the line. I sat in the front row of the funeral home, staring at the polished wood of the casket. My mind was a blur of memories. I remembered her teaching me how to plant hydrangeas in the backyard. She always said they needed just the right amount of shade to thrive. I remembered the way she looked at my father before he passed away, with a love that was quiet and unshakable. I didn't realize it then, but while I was drowning in that silence, a storm was gathering just outside the door. I was so blinded by my grief, so lost in the what-ifs and the whys, that I failed to see the shadows moving around me. I thought I was surrounded by family who shared my pain. I thought I was safe. But as the organ music began to play, a low, mournful sound that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was a cold touch, even through the fabric of my black dress. I didn't know it yet, but the silence of my mother's passing was about to be replaced by the loudest, most painful betrayal of my life. The funeral home was filled with the scent of lilies, a smell that, to this day, makes my stomach turn just a little bit. It was a grey Tuesday afternoon in our town, the kind of day where the clouds hang low and heavy, as if the sky itself is mourning. That was when my Aunt Martha made her entrance. Martha was my mother's younger sister, but they were as different as night and day. Where my mother was modest and reserved, Martha was loud. She was performative. She arrived draped in black silk that looked a bit too expensive for someone who was always complaining about her struggling boutique business. And then, there were the pearls. A thick strand of white pearls around her neck. To anyone else they looked elegant, but I knew. I had seen them up close, years ago. They were costume jewelry. They were fakes, just like the expression on her face as she approached me. She didn't just walk. She glided toward the casket, her face contorted into a mask of extreme sorrow. She began to sob, but it was a strange kind of sobbing. There were no real tears, just a lot of dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief. "Oh, my poor dear Eleanor," Martha wailed, loud enough for the back row to hear. "What will we ever do without you?" I watched her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I was too tired to cry anymore. My eyes were dry and burning. Martha turned toward me and wrapped me in a hug that felt tight, too tight. It wasn't the kind of hug that offers comfort. It felt like a grip. "Don't you worry about a thing, Emily," she whispered right into my ear. I could smell her heavy, floral perfume. It was overwhelming. "I know you are far too broken to handle the messy details. I'm your aunt. I'm family. Your mother would have wanted me to take the lead on this. I'll look after the family home. I'll handle the estate paperwork. You just go home and try to breathe, honey." At the time, I wanted to believe her. I really did. When you are in the depths of mourning, when you haven't slept for more than 2 hours at a time, you want someone to step in. You want someone to tell you that you don't have to be strong anymore. "Are you sure, Aunt Martha?" I asked, my voice sounding thin and weak, like a child's. "There is so much to do. The lawyers, the house, the utility bills." "Hush now," she interrupted, patting my hand with a rhythmic, patronizing thud. "I have it all under control. I've already spoken to a few people. Just give me the spare keys to the house, and those folders your mother kept in the mahogany desk. I'll organize everything so you don't have to look at it and get upset." Looking back, I can see the greed flickering in her eyes. It was hidden behind a veil of false sympathy, but it was there. She was like a predator, waiting for the perfect moment of weakness. And I gave it to her. I reached into my purse and handed her the brass keys to the house I grew up in. I thought I was handing over a burden. I didn't realize I was handing over my inheritance. "You're a lifesaver, Martha," I murmured. She gave me a thin, tight-lipped smile. "That's what family is for, Emily. We take care of our own, especially when there is so much complexity involved." She used that word, complexity. I should have known then. My mother's life wasn't complex. It was simple. It was honest. But Martha was already weaving a web. She stayed by the casket for the rest of the afternoon, greeting guests as if she were the hostess of a grand party, rather than a grieving sister. As I drove away from the cemetery later that day, watching the rows of white headstones disappear in my rearview mirror, I felt a small sense of relief. I thought Martha was the bridge that would carry me over this dark river of grief. I had no idea that she was actually the one pulling the stones out from under my feet, one by one, until there was nothing left to stand on. Looking back now, I can see that grief is a thick grey fog. It settles over your mind. It dampens your logic, and it makes you crave a safe harbour, no matter how fragile that harbour might be. In those days immediately following the funeral, I was not the Emily I am today. I was not the professional woman who manages millions of dollars in assets. I was just a daughter who wanted her mother back. I remember sitting in the living room of my mother's house. The house was too quiet. The clock on the mantelpiece, A beautiful old grandfather clock that my father had bought 40 years ago seemed to tick louder than usual. Every tick felt like a hammer blow. It was in this moment of utter exhaustion that Aunt Martha knocked on the door. She didn't wait for me to answer. She just walked in, her footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. She was carrying a tray of lasagna, the classic American gesture of sympathy, but she didn't set it down in the kitchen. She brought it right into the living room and sat down beside me. "Emily, dear," she said, her voice dripping with that sticky, sweet sympathy. "You look absolutely haggard. You haven't slept, have you?" I shook my head. I couldn't even find the words to tell her that every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's smile. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Martha continued. She reached out and patted my hand. Her skin was cold. "The burden of this house, the legalities, it is all too much for a grieving girl. You have your job at the firm to think about. You shouldn't have to worry about property taxes or the lawn or the mountains of paperwork Eleanor left behind." She was right, wasn't she? That was what I told myself. I felt so tired. A bone-deep fatigue that made my limbs feel like lead. "I've been thinking," Martha said, her eyes scanning the room, landing for a second too long on the antique silver tea set on the sideboard. "Why don't you let me handle the heavy lifting? I can take all those folders from Eleanor's desk. I'll organize the bills. I'll talk to the lawyers. I'll be the buffer between you and the world. Just for a little while." I hesitated. Just for a second. Somewhere deep in my mind, a small voice, perhaps it was my mother's voice, whispered for me to be careful, but the fog of grief was too thick. I wanted someone to take care of me. I wanted to believe that Martha, my mother's own sister, had my best interests at heart. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly. I walked over to the mahogany desk in the corner of the den. This was my mother's sanctuary. It smelled of old paper, ink, and the peppermint candies she always kept in the top drawer. I opened the drawer and pulled out the thick accordion folders. They contained everything: the deed to the house, the insurance policies, the bank statements. I walked back to Martha and handed them to her, along with the brass keys. "Are you sure, Aunt Martha?" I asked again. My heart felt heavy. "I am positive, honey," she said, clutching the folders to her chest. She didn't put them down. She held them like they were made of solid gold. "You just focus on healing. Leave the rest to me. I'm family, and family is the only thing we can truly rely on in this world." I watched her walk out the door. She moved quickly, much more quickly than a woman who was supposedly mourning her sister. I felt a strange sense of relief, followed by a hollow emptiness. I thought I was protecting my mother's legacy by letting her sister help. I didn't know that I had just handed Martha the crowbar she would use to dismantle my life. I didn't know that she saw those folders not as a responsibility, but as a map to a treasure chest. I went to bed that night and slept for 10 hours. The first real sleep I'd had in a week. I thought I was safe. I thought the house was in good hands. But as I slept, Martha was already leafing through those papers. She was looking for a way in. She was looking for the value of the land. She was looking for the prize. I had given her the keys to my past, and she was already planning to lock me out of my future. 3 weeks had passed since the day I handed over the keys. 3 weeks of trying to find a new normal. I had gone back to work at the firm, burying myself in spreadsheets and client meetings. The numbers were a comfort. They were logical. They didn't lie. They didn't break your heart. I had spoken to Martha a few times on the phone. She was always busy. She would tell me that the paperwork was moving along and that I shouldn't worry my pretty little head about it. She sounded distracted, businesslike. I assumed she was just stressed with the estate work. On a Saturday afternoon, the sun was shining brightly. One of those beautiful, crisp autumn days that my mother loved so much. I decided to drive over to the house. I wanted to pick up a specific cardigan, a soft blue wool sweater that my mother used to wear on chilly mornings. I wanted to feel her closeness. As I turned the corner onto Oak Street, my heart began to beat a little faster. This neighborhood was my sanctuary. I knew every tree, every sidewalk crack. But as my house came into view, I felt a cold chill wash over me. There, standing in the middle of the perfectly manicured front lawn, was a sign, a bright red and white sign. It had a realtor's name on it in bold letters, and across the top, in a mocking, cheerful font, were the words, "For sale." I stopped the car right in the middle of the street. My hands were frozen on the steering wheel. I stared at the sign. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was the neighbor's house? No. It was planted firmly in our yard. My mother's yard. No, I whispered to the empty car. No, this is a mistake. I scrambled out of the car, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. I ran up the walkway, my heels clicking sharply on the stone. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own set of keys, the ones I had kept for myself. I shoved the key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried again. I jiggled the handle. I pushed against the heavy oak door with all my weight. The key went into the slot, but the mechanism was dead. It wouldn't budge. Martha had changed the locks. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I felt the air leave my lungs. I stood there, trembling, looking at the door that had always been open to me. Now, it was a barrier. I pulled out my phone and dialed Martha's number. My fingers were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. She picked up on the third ring. "Martha, I am at the house. Why is there a for sale sign in the yard? And why don't my keys work?" There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the sound of a television in the background. Then, her voice came through. It wasn't the sweet, comforting voice of my aunt. It was sharp. It was cold. It was the voice of a stranger. "Emily," she said with a long, dramatic sigh. "You really shouldn't have gone over there without calling me first. It's for the best, honey. That house is far too much for you to maintain. The taxes, the upkeep. It's a drain on the estate." "The estate?" I screamed. "Martha, that is my home. My mother left that house to me in her will. You have no right to sell it." "Wills are complicated things, dear," she replied, her tone dripping with a condescension that made my blood boil. "And as the executor, I have a fiduciary responsibility to settle your mother's debts." She had unforeseen expenses, private debts she never told you about. I have to liquidate the assets to cover them. I'm just doing what is necessary. Debts? What debts? My mother was meticulous with her money. She didn't owe a dime to anyone. "Well," Martha said, her voice turning icy, "the records say otherwise. Now please, don't make this harder than it already is. I have a showing in an hour. Don't be on the property when the potential buyers arrive." It would be awkward. And then she hung up. I stood there on the porch, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. The silence of the street felt different now. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a suburban afternoon. It was the silence of a crime scene. I looked at the for sale sign again. It felt like a tombstone. Martha wasn't just selling a house. She was selling my memories. She was selling my mother's life. To pay for her own failures. A wave of fury washed over me, burning through the fog of grief. Martha thought I was weak. She thought I was just a grieving girl she could push around. She thought she could steal my inheritance right out from under me because she had the title of executor. But as I walked back to my car, my mind began to clear. The professional Emily, the woman who understood the intricacies of wealth management, was waking up. Martha made one massive mistake. She forgot who I was. She forgot where I worked. And she forgot that my mother didn't just teach me how to bake pies. She taught me how to read the fine print. The battle had begun. And Martha had no idea that I was about to bring her entire world crashing down around her ears. I sat there in my car, the engine idling quietly, staring at that bright red and white realtor sign, as if it were a monster that had just crawled out of the earth. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles were white. I felt a cold, hollow sensation in the pit of my stomach. I picked up my phone again. My thumb hovered over Martha's name in my contacts. My heart was racing, a frantic, uneven thud against my ribs. I hit the call button. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Yes, Emily? Martha's voice came through the speaker. It was a voice I didn't recognize. Gone was the sugary, sweet, mourning sister. This voice was clipped. It was efficient. It sounded like a debt collector calling about an overdue bill. Martha, I'm standing in front of my mother's house, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. There is a sign in the yard. My keys don't work. What is going on? I heard a soft, dismissive sigh on the other end of the line. Emily, we have been through this, she said. I am the executor of the estate. I have spent the last few weeks going through Eleanor's books, truly going through them, and frankly, I was shocked by what I found. What are you talking about? I asked. My mind was spinning. Your mother was very good at keeping up appearances, Martha said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that felt like a slap. But the reality is, she had debts, serious debts. There were credit cards you didn't know about. There were old medical bills from your father's last illness that she had been shuffling around for years, and the back taxes on that property. Well, they are substantial. I felt a surge of hot, prickling anger. That is a lie, I said, my voice growing stronger. My mother was meticulous. She lived a simple life. She didn't have credit card debt. She paid off my father's medical bills years ago. I saw the receipts. Oh, Emily, Martha said, and I could practically feel her rolling her eyes through the phone. You saw what she wanted you to see. She didn't want to worry her little girl. But as the executor, I see the truth. The estate is practically underwater. If I don't sell this house immediately, the bank will move in. I am trying to save what little is left. I am doing this for the family name. You can't sell it without my consent, I shouted. Actually, I can, Martha replied. Her voice was now as cold as a winter morning in Minnesota. I have the legal authority. I have already signed the listing agreement. In fact, we already have several interested parties. One of them is looking to move very quickly. It is a cash offer, Emily. $850,000. That money will clear the debts and, perhaps, leave a small pittance for you once my fees are covered. Her fees. That was it. I could hear the greed dripping from her words like honey. I don't believe you, I said, my breath coming in short gasps. I want to see the records. I want to see these debts you are talking about. I don't have to show you anything right now, Martha snapped. I am busy preparing the house for a final walkthrough. You are just being emotional. It is understandable, but it is also a nuisance. Now, please, go home. Stay away from the property. You are trespassing, Emily. Don't make me call the police on my own niece. It would be so embarrassing for everyone involved. The line went dead. I sat in the silence of my car, the dial tone humming in my ear. I looked at the house. The windows, like eyes, seemed to be watching me. My mother's lace curtains were still hanging in the front room. I could see the silhouette of her favorite lamp. Hidden debts, medical bills, back taxes. None of it made sense. My mother had taught me about compound interest when I was 10 years old. She had a file for every utility bill going back 20 years. She was a woman who didn't buy a new pair of shoes unless she had the cash in her envelope. Martha was lying. I knew it in my soul. But she had the folders. She had the keys. And most importantly, she had the title of executor. The word executor is a heavy one. In the eyes of the law, in the state of Maryland, it gave Martha a mountain of power. It meant she was the voice of the deceased. It meant she was the hand that moved the chess pieces. I stood on the sidewalk. The same sidewalk where I had learned to ride my bicycle with my father holding onto the back of the seat. The neighborhood felt strange, like a movie set where the actors had all gone home. Martha had used that word. Fiduciary. She had used the word liquidate. She was trying to bury me under a landslide of legal jargon, hoping I would be too intimidated, or too tired, to dig my way out. I looked at the maple tree in the front yard. Its leaves were turning a fiery red. My mother loved this time of year. She used to say that the trees were giving us one last show before they went to sleep. I felt a shadow move in the front window of the house. I squinted. It was Martha. She was standing there, holding a glass of what looked like white wine, looking out at me. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just watched me, like a queen surveying her kingdom. She had changed the locks. That was the most painful part. The physical act of being locked out of your own history. I walked up to the edge of the lawn, but I didn't step on the grass. I remembered what she said about trespassing. My own aunt, threatening me with the police. "This is not over, Martha," I yelled. Though I knew she probably couldn't hear me through the heavy glass, I turned and walked back to my car. My heart was heavy, but the anger was starting to crystallize into something else. It was turning into a cold, sharp clarity. Martha thought she was the only one who understood how the world worked. She thought, because I was Eleanor's daughter, I was just a soft, sentimental girl. She forgot that I spent 40 hours a week, sometimes 60, surrounded by lawyers and estate planners. She forgot that my job was to find money that people tried to hide. I drove away from Oak Street, but I didn't go back to my apartment. I went straight to my office. The building was nearly empty. It was a Saturday evening, and the janitors were the only ones there. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I had access to databases that Martha couldn't even dream of. I could trace records, to look at title histories, to verify tax liens. Complicated, she had said. The will is complicated. Well, I was about to find out exactly how complicated it was. I began to type. My fingers flew across the keys. I felt a strange sense of calm. The grief was still there, a dull ache in the background. But the professional Emily was now in the driver's seat. I started with the house. I pulled the property tax records for the last 10 years. Zero. The amount of back taxes owed was zero. Every single year had been paid in full, and usually a month early. I looked at the liens on the property. None. There were no outstanding medical liens, no secondary mortgages, nothing. My mother didn't have hidden debts. She had a pristine record. So, why was Martha lying? Why was she so desperate to sell a house for $850,000 in a cash deal? I dug deeper. I started looking into Martha's own history, her boutique business in the city. I pulled the public filings for her LLC, and there it was. Martha wasn't trying to save my mother's estate. She was trying to save herself. Her business was drowning in debt. She had 3 outstanding lawsuits from suppliers. She was months behind on her commercial rent. She didn't see my mother's house as a home. She saw it as a life raft. But then, I found the most important piece of the puzzle. I found the one thing Martha had overlooked in her haste to grab the folders and change the locks. I found the trust. My mother had spoken about it once, years ago, but I had forgotten the details in the haze of the funeral. As I scrolled through the private wealth management records of our firm, there it was, the Eleanor Vance Living Trust, created 15 years ago, amended 5 years ago. I clicked on the document and began to read. My heart stopped. Martha had claimed the will was complicated. Martha had claimed her power as executor was absolute. But according to this document, the house on Oak Street was never part of the probate estate. It didn't fall under the jurisdiction of the will. It was held in the trust, and the sole beneficiary of the trust? It wasn't Martha. It was me. A slow smile spread across my face. A cold smile. And sharp. And very, very dangerous. Martha thought she was holding all the cards. She thought she had the power of the executor, but she had been playing a game on a table that didn't even belong to her. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the city lights. "You want to play hardball, Martha?" I whispered to the empty office. "Then let's play." The battle was no longer about grief. It was about justice. And I was about to show my aunt that you should never, ever try to steal from someone who knows exactly where the bodies and the bank accounts are buried. There is a certain kind of silence that only exists in a high-floor office building after 7 o'clock in the evening. It is not the heavy, suffocating silence of a funeral home. It is a productive silence. It is the sound of air filtration systems humming, the faint, rhythmic clicking of a cooling computer server, and the distant, muffled pulse of the city traffic far below. I sat in my ergonomic chair at Sterling and Associates, the private wealth management firm where I have spent the last 15 years of my life. I looked at my hands. They were no longer shaking. The tears that had blurred my vision on Oak Street had dried, leaving behind a strange, crystalline clarity. Martha had made a mistake. A massive, arrogant, and ultimately, fatal mistake. She had spent so many years looking down on me as little Emily, the quiet girl who followed her mother around like a shadow, that she completely forgot what I do for a living. She saw me as a grieving daughter. She saw me as a victim. She forgot that I am a senior asset manager. She forgot that my entire career is built on the ability to find money, to protect assets, and to sniff out a lie in a financial statement from a mile away. But most importantly, she forgot that Sterling and Associates was the very firm that my mother, Eleanor, had trusted with her private finances for over 2 decades. I leaned forward and moved my mouse. The dual monitors on my desk flared to life, casting a cool, blue glow over my face. I felt like a soldier putting on armor. This was my world. This was the arena where I knew the rules better than anyone. I logged into our secure internal database. My heart gave a small, steady thud as I typed in my mother's name. Eleanor Vance. The system took a moment to process the request. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and then the files began to populate the screen. Martha thought she had everything because she had the physical folders from my mother's desk. She thought that by changing the locks and holding onto the paper deeds, she held the power. She belonged to a generation that believed if you held the paper, you owned the truth. But in the modern world, the truth lives in the digital cloud. It lives in encrypted servers and verified transaction logs. I began to dig. I started with the phantom debts Martha had mentioned on the phone. She had spoken about credit card balances and old medical bills. I opened the liability section of my mother's profile. I scrolled through the last 10 years of credit reports. The screen showed a series of beautiful, perfect, green check marks. Credit score, 842. Outstanding balances, 0. I felt a surge of cold, sharp satisfaction. Martha was not just exaggerating. She was fabricating. She was creating a mountain of debt out of thin air to justify the sale of the house. Then, I moved to the medical records. My father's passing 10 years ago had been a long, difficult battle with cancer. Martha claimed those bills were still unpaid. I pulled the insurance settlement records. There it was. A final payment made to the Mayo Clinic 9 years, 11 months, and 20 days ago. The account was closed, settled in full. My mother had even written a thank you note to the billing department. Integrity, I whispered to the empty office. That was your favorite word, Mom. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how desperate Martha truly was. I pulled a background check on Martha's boutique business. It was a disaster. She had taken out 3 high-interest merchant cash advances in the last year alone. She was paying interest rates of over 40%. She wasn't just struggling. She was drowning. And she saw my mother's house. an $850,000 asset with no mortgage, as her personal life raft. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. The anger was gone now, replaced by a cold, professional determination. I felt a sense of duty that went beyond my own inheritance. I was protecting the legacy of a woman who had worked her entire life, to be honest. I returned to the screen and opened the most important folder of all, the Eleanor Vance Irrevocable Living Trust. I began to read the fine print. Martha had claimed that, as the executor of the will, she had the final say. And in many cases, she would be right. A will has to go through probate court. It is a long, public, and expensive process where an executor has a lot of leeway. But a living trust is different. A trust is a separate legal entity. It does not go through probate. It does not wait for a judge. The moment my mother passed away, the trust took full effect. And the house on Oak Street? It had been moved into that trust over 10 years ago. I scrolled down to the section titled Successor Trustee. In the event of Eleanor Vance's passing, who would manage the assets? I held my breath. I knew my mother had mentioned this once, but I had been so young then. There it was, in black and white. Successor Trustee, Emily Vance. My heart skipped a beat, and then it started to pound with a slow, heavy rhythm. Martha wasn't just overstepping her bounds. She was committing fraud. She had no legal right to sign a listing agreement for that house. She had no legal right to even be inside that house without my permission. The power of the executor that she had used to threaten me was a paper shield. It was useless against the titanium walls of a living trust. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 9 o'clock. I had been working for 2 hours, but it felt like 10 minutes. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I knew Martha. I knew her pride. I knew that if I attacked her now, she would find a way to squirrel the money away, or she would destroy the interior of the house out of spite. She was like a cornered animal, and cornered animals are dangerous. I needed to let her think she was winning. I wanted her to spend her own money on the staging. I wanted her to pay the cleaners. I wanted her to sit in that house and dream about the $850,000 that she thought was coming her way. I wanted the fall to be long. I wanted it to be steep. I opened a blank document and began to draft a series of instructions. I would need certified copies of the trust documents. I would need a formal cease and desist order ready to go. But I wouldn't send them yet. I would wait until the very last moment. I would wait until the closing date. In the real estate world, the closing is the moment of truth. It is when the money moves. It is when the buyer is excited and the seller is ready to collect their check. It is the moment when a cancellation causes the maximum amount of chaos. I saved my files to an encrypted thumb drive. I shut down the monitors. The office returned to its soft, nighttime darkness. As I walked to the elevator, I felt a strange sense of peace. The world was still silent, but it wasn't an empty silence anymore. I could almost hear my mother's voice in the quiet hallway. "Emily," she seemed to say. "Always read the fine print, honey." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the garage. Martha thought she was the one in control because she had the keys. She forgot that I was the one who knew how to change the locks on the entire world. The investigation was over. Now, it was time to prepare for the sting. The clock on the wall of the break room showed that it was nearly 3 in the morning. I had been sitting in the same position for hours, my back stiff, my neck aching. But I didn't care. I didn't even feel the fatigue anymore. When you are hunting for the truth, adrenaline is a far more powerful fuel than coffee. I looked at the blue light of the computer screen. This was the moment where the fog of grief was finally, truly, lifting. Martha had spent weeks telling me that my mother, Eleanor, was a woman of secrets. She had painted a picture of an irresponsible mother, a woman who had spent money she didn't have, a woman who had left her daughter a mountain of debt instead of a legacy. But the screen in front of me told a different story. It was a story told in balance sheets, transaction logs, and interest rates. I pulled up the last 7 years of my mother's bank records. I went through every single line item. I saw the checks she wrote to the local grocery store. I saw the monthly payments to her church. I saw the modest, sensible donations she made to the American Cancer Society every December. There were no secret credit cards. There were no gambling debts. There were no unpaid medical bills. In fact, quite the opposite was true. My mother was not just responsible. She was a financial artist. She had managed her modest pension and my father's life insurance with a precision that would put most of our high-net-worth clients to shame. I felt a lump in my throat as I looked at a recurring transfer she had set up 10 years ago. It was a small amount, $50 a month, going into a separate account labeled Emily's Future Emergency, even while she was supposedly drowning in debt. As Martha put it, she was still thinking about me. She was still looking out for her daughter. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second. The anger I felt toward Martha was now so cold, so sharp. It felt like a physical weight in my chest. Martha wasn't just trying to steal the house. She was trying to steal my mother's character. She was trying to rewrite my mother's life as a failure so she could justify her own greed. But then, I found it, the digital holy grail of this entire nightmare. I had been digging through the general accounts, but then I remembered that my mother always spoke about a special folder she kept at the firm. I used my administrator credentials to bypass the standard client view. And there, hidden behind 3 layers of encryption, was the Eleanor Vance Living Trust. I opened the document. It was 68 pages of dense, legal language. For most people, it would be a nightmare to read. But to me, it was a map to freedom. I scrolled past the preamble. I scrolled past the definitions of grantor and beneficiary. I went straight to the section titled Schedule of Assets. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Item 1. Real property located at 124 Oak Street. There it was. In the United States, particularly in a state like ours, most people think that a will is the final word. They think that when someone dies, the will goes to a judge and the executor. In this case, Martha gets to decide how everything is sold. But a living trust is a different animal entirely. When my mother moved the house into the trust 15 years ago, it effectively stopped belonging to her as an individual. It belonged to the trust. And because the trust is its own legal entity, it does not die when the person dies. It bypasses the entire probate court system. It bypasses the executor. I read the next paragraph out loud to the empty, dark office. My voice sounded strange, hollow, but certain. Upon the death of the grantor, Eleanor Vance, the successor trustee, shall have immediate, exclusive, and absolute authority over all trust assets, including the real property at Oak Street, and then the name. The successor trustee is hereby designated as Emily Vance. I stopped. I breathed in the stale, recycled office air. Martha had been acting as the executor. She had been using the power of the will to change the locks and list the house for $850,000. But the will only covers assets that are in the probate estate. Since the house was in a trust, the will had no power over it. Martha's signature on that listing agreement with the realtor, it was worthless. Her authority to change those locks? Non-existent. She was, quite literally, a stranger, trying to sell a house she had no legal connection to. I felt a surge of triumph that was so intense it made me lightheaded. I wasn't just a daughter who was being bullied. I was the legal owner of that property. I was the trustee. I was the one with the power. But I also realized something else. If Martha had been telling the title company and the realtor that she was the authorized seller, she was committing felony fraud. She was lying to a financial institution. She was lying to the county records office. She was digging a hole so deep she would never be able to climb out. I looked at the date on the screen. The closing for the house was scheduled for next Friday. Martha was counting down the days until she received that $850,000 check. She was probably already spending the money in her head. She was probably planning how she would pay off her boutique's debts and buy herself something shiny for her trouble. I sat there, watching the cursor blink on the screen. I could call her right now. I could tell her what I found. I could watch her scream and cry and try to make excuses. But no, family doesn't steal from orphans. And people who try to destroy a mother's reputation don't deserve a warning. I decided, right then, at 3:15 in the morning, that I was going to let her continue. I was going to let her stage the house. I was going to let her pay the realtor fees and the cleaning costs. I was going to let her get all the way to the finish line. And then, I was going to pull the rug out from under her. I saved a copy of the trust documents to a secure, encrypted drive. I printed a physical copy, the paper feeling warm and heavy in my hands. I tucked it into my briefcase as if it were a precious heirloom. As I walked out of the office, the sun was just starting to peek over the horizon. The sky was a pale, delicate pink. It reminded me of the roses my mother used to grow in the garden. The truth was finally out. It had been buried in a digital file, hidden away by a woman who knew her sister better than I ever did. My mother knew Martha was greedy. She knew Martha was manipulative, and she had built this trust as a fortress to protect me. "I've got it from here, Mum," I whispered as I got into my car. The world was no longer silent. It was loud with the sound of justice, and I was the one who was going to conduct the orchestra. They say that revenge is a dish best served cold, but in my profession, we say that justice is a result best served with a mountain of evidence. After that long, lonely night at the office, I didn't rush to the courthouse. I didn't call the police. I didn't even send a snarky text message to my Aunt Martha. Instead, I went home. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and I sat on my balcony, watching the moon hang over the city. I felt a strange, quiet power. For the first time since my mother passed away, I wasn't just a grieving daughter. I was a player in a game that Martha didn't even know she was playing. The next morning, I drove back to my childhood neighborhood. I didn't park in front of the house. I parked 2 blocks away, under the shade of an old oak tree, and I walked. I wanted to see what Martha was doing with my mother's legacy. As I rounded the corner, I saw a large, white van parked in the driveway. It had the words "Elite Home Staging" painted on the side in gold letters. I watched from a distance as 2 men carried out my mother's old, comfortable armchair, the one where she used to sit and read her mystery novels every evening. They replaced it with a sleek, modern, grey sofa that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. Martha was standing on the porch, wearing a bright, yellow power suit. She looked like she was auditioning for a reality television show about real estate. She was pointing, barking orders, and checking things off on a clipboard. She was staging the house. In the American real estate market, staging is a common practice. You remove the personality of the home so that potential buyers can imagine their own lives there. But as I watched my mother's hand-knit blankets being tossed into a cardboard box, it felt like Martha was trying to erase her sister's very existence. I leaned against a fence, my heart tight in my chest. "Why aren't you stopping her, Emily?" I whispered to myself. The answer was simple. I was an asset manager, and in my world, you let a bad actor commit as many errors as possible before you shut them down. If I stopped her now, Martha would claim it was a misunderstanding. She would say she was just trying to help. She would argue that she didn't know about the trust. But if I let her go all the way to the end, if I let her sign the final documents and accept a deposit, she would be committing a clear, undeniable act of fraud. She was digging her own grave, and I was going to let her have the best shovel money could buy. Over the next week, I drove by the house every evening. I watched the progress. Martha had hired a professional landscaping crew to rip out my mother's overgrown lavender bushes. They replaced them with neat, boring rows of boxwood. It looked like every other house on the block now. Sterile. Empty. I saw the open house signs go up on Friday afternoon. Martha had even put out little flags along the sidewalk. I decided to go inside. I put on a pair of large, dark sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. I looked like any other curious neighbor or potential buyer. I walked up the steps. The same steps where I used to sit and wait for the school bus. And I walked through the front door. The house smelled like spring rain air freshener and expensive candles. It didn't smell like home. It didn't smell like my mother's cinnamon cookies or her lavender perfume. Martha was in the kitchen, pouring glasses of sparkling cider for a young couple. The kitchen was updated just 5 years ago, I heard her say, her voice full of that false, melodic charm. My sister was very particular about her home. She would be so happy to know a young family is moving in. I almost choked on the irony. Martha was using my mother's memory to sell the very roof that was supposed to protect her daughter. I walked through the dining room. I looked at the walls. My mother's photos were gone. The silver tea set was polished to a mirror finish, but it sat on a table that wasn't ours. Martha saw me, but she didn't recognize me. To her, I was just another wealthy woman looking for a suburban retreat. "Isn't the light beautiful?" she asked, walking toward me with a brochure. "We are expecting several offers by Sunday. The asking price is $850,000, but we anticipate it might go even higher." "It's a lovely property," I said, keeping my voice low and disguised. "The executor must be very diligent." "Oh, I am," Martha said, glowing with pride. "I have handled everything myself. It has been a labor of love, and quite a bit of work to settle the various complications." I took the brochure from her hand. It was glossy, it was professional, and it was a piece of evidence. It listed Martha as the authorized representative of the estate. I walked out of the house, my skin crawling. On Monday morning, I received a notification through the county's digital filing system. I had set up an alert on the property title, pending sale, 124 Oak Street. Martha had done it. She had found a buyer, an all-cash offer for $850,000. The closing was set for the following Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning. I sat at my desk at the firm and looked at the calendar. Martha was probably already celebrating. She was probably calling her creditors and telling them that the money was coming. She was probably looking at new cars or planning a vacation to the Caribbean. I thought about the young couple I saw at the open house. I felt a momentary pang of guilt for them. They were innocent. They just wanted a home. But I knew that the title company would never let the sale go through once they saw the trust documents. They wouldn't lose their money. They would just lose their time. The person who was going to lose everything was Martha. She had spent thousands of dollars of her own money, or perhaps she had borrowed more, to stage the house and hire the crews. She was counting on the commission and the executor fees she had planned to pay herself from the proceeds. She was standing on the edge of a cliff, and she was leaning forward, waiting to fly. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I worked with a senior attorney at our firm, a man who had known my mother for years. When I showed him the trust documents and the listing agreement Martha had signed, he shook his head in disbelief. "This is bold, Emily," he said. "She is signing documents under penalty of perjury. She is claiming she has the right to convey title when she knows she doesn't." "I want to wait until the day before the closing," I told him. He looked at me, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "The long game. I like it. It ensures that she cannot claim she made a simple mistake. It shows a pattern of deliberate deception." I felt a cold, hard lump of satisfaction in my stomach. This was for my mother. This was for every time Martha had made her feel less than because she lived a simple life. This was for the fake tears at the funeral. The week dragged on. Every day was a test of my patience. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her. But I remained silent. I remained the grieving girl she thought I was. As Thursday afternoon arrived, the sun began to set over the city. I looked at the clock. 24 hours. In 24 hours, Martha would be at the title company office. She would be sitting at a polished mahogany table, waiting for the buyer to sign the papers. She would be dreaming of that $850,000 check. And that was exactly when I would strike. I picked up my briefcase and walked out of the office. The air was crisp. The trees were almost bare now. Winter was coming. And for Martha, the frost was going to be permanent. There is an old saying that my mother used to repeat whenever she saw someone getting a bit too ahead of themselves. She would say, "Emily, never count your chickens before they hatch." It is a simple piece of wisdom, but it is one that my Aunt Martha had clearly forgotten. The news of the offer came on a Tuesday afternoon. I saw it hit the digital records at my firm first. An all-cash offer. No contingencies. No waiting for a bank to approve a mortgage. No inspections to worry about. The price was exactly $850,000. In our town, $850,000 is a lot of money. It is the kind of money that changes lives. It is the kind of money that can make a desperate person feel like they have finally won the lottery. I could almost imagine Martha's face when she saw that number on the contract. I could imagine her eyes widening, her breath catching, and that greedy, sharp smile spreading across her lips. To her, that money wasn't just a sale price, it was a get-out-of-jail-free card. I began to hear rumors from our mutual acquaintances in the community. Our town is small, and news travels faster than a summer storm. People were talking about Martha. They said she was acting like she had just inherited a kingdom. One of my mother's old friends, a sweet woman named Mrs. Higgins, called me to check in. She sounded confused. "Emily, dear," she said over the phone. "I saw your Aunt Martha at the country club yesterday. She was buying champagne for everyone at the bar. She told everyone that the family estate was finally being settled and that she was expecting a massive windfall. Is everything all right?" I took a deep breath and looked at the certified trust documents sitting on my desk. "Everything is being handled, Mrs. Higgins," I replied, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "Martha is certainly enthusiastic about the sale." Enthusiastic was an understatement. Martha was behaving like a woman possessed by sudden wealth. She didn't wait for the closing. She didn't wait for the deed to be recorded. She didn't even wait for the 3-day rescission period. I heard that she went straight to the Cadillac dealership on the edge of town. She didn't just look. She bought. A brand new, white sedan with leather seats and every feature imaginable. I heard she told the salesman that she would pay the balance in full the moment her real estate wire cleared on Friday. She also went to her boutique. The creditors, the people she owed money for fabric and rent, were suddenly being promised checks by Monday. She was using the $850,000 as a shield, waving it in front of people to keep them from suing her. It was a dangerous game. In the world of finance, we call this counting on a future interest. But in the real world, it was just pure, unadulterated delusion. She was spending money that didn't belong to her. She was celebrating a victory that was built on a foundation of sand. Every time she swiped her credit card, every time she signed a new lease or made a promise, she was digging her own hole a little deeper. I watched the clock. I watched the days tick by. Wednesday, Thursday, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt a lingering sadness. This was my mother's sister. This was someone I had spent holidays with. I remembered her bringing over pumpkin pies for Thanksgiving. I remembered her laughing with my mother on the back porch. But then, I would remember the for sale sign. I would remember the changed locks. I would remember her cold, businesslike voice telling me that my mother was a debtor and a liar. The sadness would vanish, replaced by a cold, hard sense of duty. Martha was celebrating with $850,000 of ghost money. She thought she was the queen of Oak Street. She thought she had outsmarted me. She thought that because I was quiet, I was weak, She didn't realize that I was simply waiting for the clock to strike midnight. I was waiting for the moment when her pride was at its highest, so that the fall would be final. The closing was scheduled for Friday morning, at 10 o'clock sharp, at the offices of Heritage Title and Escrow. Martha had already sent out an email to the family, claiming that she was fulfilling Eleanor's last wishes by finalizing the sale. I sat in my office on Thursday evening, the lights of the city twinkling outside my window. I looked at the file I had prepared. $850,000. It was a beautiful number. But to Martha, it was about to become a zero that would ruin her life. And as I prepared my final move, I realized that I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing this because my mother's house was not a check. It was a home. And a home is something that greed can never truly buy. Thursday night was the longest night of my life. I sat in my home office, the only light coming from the glow of my computer screen. The rest of the apartment was dark, and the silence felt heavy, expectant. It was nearly 11 o'clock. The closing for the house on Oak Street was exactly 11 hours away. In the real estate world, the 24 hours before a closing are the most critical. This is when the title company does its final check. This is when the wire transfers are staged. This is when the attorneys for both sides give the final green light. Martha had done her part. She had signed the preliminary papers. She had sworn, under penalty of perjury, that she was the authorized executor with the power to sell the property. She had convinced the buyer's lawyer and the title company that everything was in order. She was so confident, so sure of herself. I opened my email. I had already drafted the message earlier that afternoon. It was short. It was professional. It was devastating. I looked at the to field. I had included the senior escrow officer at Heritage Title. I had included the lead attorney for the buyers. And, for good measure, I included the realtor who had listed the property. The subject line was simple: urgent, cloud on title and unauthorized sale, 124 Oak Street. I took a deep breath. My heart was thumping in a slow, steady rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. I attached the files. The first attachment was the Eleanor Vance Living Trust. The second attachment was my certified appointment as successor trustee. The third attachment was a formal cease and desist letter, signed by the head of the legal department at my firm. The body of the email read, "To all parties involved, please be advised that the property located at 124 Oak Street is not part of the probate estate of Eleanor Vance. It is a trust asset. As the sole successor trustee, I have not authorized the sale of this property. Aunt Martha, acting as executor of a will that does not govern this asset, has no legal standing to convey title. This closing must be cancelled immediately to avoid further legal action and potential charges of fraud." I moved the cursor over the send button. I thought about the Cadillac Martha had bought. I thought about the champagne she had poured for her friends. I thought about the way she had looked at me through the window of my mother's house, like I was an intruder. I clicked send. The little spinning icon on the screen lasted for only a second. And then, message sent. It was done. The arrow had been released. I didn't go to bed. I couldn't. I sat on my sofa and watched the clock. 11:30, 12 o'clock, 1 in the morning. I imagined the servers at the title company receiving my email. I imagined the automated notifications popping up on the lawyers' phones. The response came sooner than I expected. At exactly 1:45 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the escrow officer. "We have received your documents, Miss Vance. We are reviewing them immediately. All activities regarding this file have been suspended pending verification." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, so strong that I actually felt dizzy. I leaned my head back against the cushion and closed my eyes. The sale was dead, but the real fireworks didn't start until about 7 o'clock on Friday morning. My phone began to ring. It was Martha. I didn't answer. She called again. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was trembling with a mix of confusion and rage. Emily, pick up the phone. I just got a call from the title company saying there is a problem with the title. Are they talking about a trust? What are you doing? You are going to blow this deal. The buyers are already on their way to the office. Call me back right now. I waited. I wanted her to feel the panic. I wanted her to feel the weight of the lies she had told. At 9 o'clock, 1 hour before the closing was supposed to happen, I sent a text message to Martha. I am at my office, Martha. If you want to talk, you can come here. But the house is not for sale. It never was. I knew she would come. And I knew that when she walked through those glass doors, the Martha who thought she was the queen of the world would be gone. In her place would be a woman who realized she had just spent $850,000 of someone else's money, and that the bill was finally due. I straightened my blazer. I cleared my desk. I was ready. The long game was over. The truth was out. And now, it was time for the final confrontation. The clock on my office wall ticked toward 11 o'clock on Friday morning. This was the exact moment when the closing at Heritage Title was supposed to be finishing. This was the moment when Martha expected to be shaking hands with the buyers and walking out with a check for $850,000. Instead, my office door burst open. I didn't even have to look up to know it was Martha. I could smell her heavy, floral perfume before I saw her. I could hear the sharp, frantic click of her high heels on the marble floor. She didn't look like the polished, elegant woman from the funeral. Her hair was disheveled. Her face was a dark, mottled shade of red. She was shaking so hard that the gold bracelets on her wrist were rattling like dry bones. "You!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "How dare you? How dare you do this to me?" I sat perfectly still behind my desk. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. I felt a strange, quiet, calm. It was the kind of calm you feel after a long, exhausting storm has finally passed. "Hello, Martha," I said, my voice low and steady. "I assume the closing didn't go as planned?" "You know exactly what happened," Martha shrieked. She slammed her designer handbag down on my desk. The title officer walked in and said the sale was blocked. She said you sent an email. She said there is a trust. What kind of games are you playing, Emily? That house was mine to sell. I am the executor. No, Martha, I said, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. You are the executor of a will that only covers probate assets. But my mother was smarter than you gave her credit for. She moved that house into a living trust 15 years ago. It was never yours to touch. It belongs to me. Martha began to pace back and forth in front of my desk. Like a trapped animal. She was breathing in short, ragged gasps. You ruined everything, she wailed. Do you have any idea what you have done? I have creditors breathing down my neck. My boutique is on the verge of being evicted. I was counting on that money, Emily. I needed that money. The money didn't belong to you, Martha, I reminded her. It belonged to Eleanor's estate. Even if the sale had been legal, you weren't supposed to take $850,000 for yourself. You were supposed to manage it for the beneficiary. For me, Martha stopped pacing. She looked at me, her eyes wide and desperate. I already spent the deposit, she whispered. The room went silent. The deposit? I asked. You mean the $85,000 that the buyers put into escrow? I convinced the realtor to release part of it to me early, she stammered, her voice getting smaller and smaller. I told them there were urgent repairs needed. I bought that white Cadillac outside. I paid off my 3 months of back rent. I paid off my personal credit cards. I thought the sale was a sure thing. I thought I could just pay it back once the wire cleared today. I felt a wave of cold, pure disgust. She hadn't just tried to sell my house. She had embezzled the buyer's deposit. She had committed a crime. Martha, that is fraud, I said. You used a position of trust to steal from people who just wanted a home. And you did it all while lying about my mother's reputation. I'm family, she screamed, her voice rising again. How can you talk to me about fraud? I'm your own flesh and blood. You have to help me, Emily. If the sale doesn't go through, the title company will demand that deposit back. The dealership will repossess the car. I'll be ruined. I'll have to declare bankruptcy. I stood up slowly. I walked around my desk until I was standing just a few feet away from her. I looked into her eyes, and I didn't see an aunt. I saw a stranger who had tried to erase my mother's life for a luxury sedan. Family doesn't steal from orphans, Martha, I said. Every word, sharp and clear. Family doesn't tell lies about a dead sister to cover up their own failures. You wanted to play the role of the powerful executor? Well, you played it right into a corner. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. I am revoking your status as executor, I said. My lawyers have already filed the paperwork with the probate court. Because you attempted to sell a trust asset and misrepresented your authority, you are being removed for cause. And as for the deposit, you had better find a way to pay it back, because the title company is already preparing their own legal action against you. Martha collapsed into the chair. She looked small. She looked old. The white Cadillac she had bought with stolen money was parked downstairs, a symbol of a life built on lies. Please, Emily, she sobbed. I'll lose everything. You already lost the only thing that mattered, Martha, I said. You lost the respect of this family. Now, please leave my office. I have work to do. Real work. She didn't move for a long, painful minute. Then, she slowly picked up her handbag. She walked out of the door with her head down. The clicking of her heels was no longer sharp. It was dull. It was defeated. I sat back down at my desk and looked out the window. The white Cadillac was still there, glinting in the sun. It was a beautiful car, but it was a hollow shell, just like Martha's promises. Within a month, Martha had lost the car. Within 3 months, she had lost her boutique. And by the end of the year, she was forced to declare bankruptcy. The community we lived in is small, and the story of her betrayal spread like wildfire. The queen of the country club was now someone people avoided in the grocery store. She had tried to prey on my grief, but she learned the hard way, that truth has a way of coming to light, even when it is buried in the fine print. It has been 6 months since the day Martha walked out of my office. It is a beautiful Saturday morning in May. I am standing in the backyard of the house on Oak Street. My house. The for sale sign is long gone. The modern grey furniture that Martha used for staging has been returned to the warehouse. I spent the last few weeks putting everything back exactly the way it was. My mother's favourite armchair is back in the living room, right next to the grandfather clock. Her lace curtains are hanging in the windows again. The house smells like lemon polish and old books. It smells like peace. But my favourite place is here, in the garden. I am kneeling in the dirt, my hands covered in dark, rich soil. I am planting a new row of hydrangeas. My mother always said they were the heart of the home. They are resilient, they are beautiful, and they return every year, no matter how harsh the winter was. I look at the house. It looks strong. It looks loved. Martha's downfall was absolute. I heard that she moved into a tiny apartment on the other side of the county. She doesn't call me. I don't call her. The bridge between us was burned by her own hand, and the ashes have long since blown away. Sometimes, I sit on the back porch and drink a cup of Earl Grey tea, just like I used to do with my mother. In those quiet moments, I can almost feel her presence. I can almost hear her voice in the rustle of the maple leaves. You did well, Emily, she seems to whisper. I realize now that my mother didn't just leave me a house. She didn't just leave me a living trust. She left me a lesson in strength. She knew that the world could be a cruel place. She knew that even the people we trust can be blinded by greed. She built a fortress around me, not with bricks and mortar, but with the law. with integrity, and with a deep, abiding love. The house on Oak Street is more than just an asset. It is a sanctuary. It is a place where memories are kept safe. It is a place where the truth lives. As I pat the soil around the last hydrangea bush, I look up at the sky. It is a clear, bright blue. The sun is warm on my back. I have found my peace. My aunt thought she could prey on my grief. She thought she could take advantage of a daughter's broken heart. But she forgot that some legacies are protected by more than just paper. They are protected by the strength of the people who are left behind. I am Eleanor's daughter. I am a woman who knows the value of a promise. And I am the guardian of this home. And as the hydrangeas begin to bloom, in shades of deep blue and soft pink, I know that the garden, if you have enjoyed this story, if it has reminded you of the importance of protecting those you love and standing up for what is right, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It means the world to us to share these stories with you. Thank you for listening. And remember, even in the darkest times, the truth will always find its way home. As the sun sets over the garden today, I am reminded that life is not about the things we accumulate. It is about the truth we leave behind. My mother, Eleanor, left me more than just a house. She left me the courage to stand my ground, even when the world felt like it was falling apart. Money has a strange way of acting like a mirror. It shows you exactly who a person is, once the masks of politeness are stripped away. For my Aunt Martha, that mirror revealed a heart filled with greed and desperation. But for me, it revealed a strength I never knew I had, a strength that was passed down from my mother, one Friday evening at the kitchen table, one bank statement at a time. We often think that family is a bond that can never be broken, and in a perfect world, that would be true. But sometimes, we have to learn a hard lesson. We have to learn that blood does not always mean loyalty, integrity, honesty, and respect. Those are the things that truly define a family. If you are listening to this, perhaps you have faced a similar trial in your own life. Perhaps you have seen someone's true colors when a will was read, or when a family home was at stake. It is a painful experience. It is a heavy burden to carry. But please remember, you are not alone. There is a quiet, steady power in the truth. And as long as you hold on to your integrity, you have everything. Before we part ways, I want to remind you that the details shared in this story are for entertainment and to raise awareness about the importance of estate planning. Laws regarding trusts and inheritance can be very complex, and they vary from state to state. So please, always consult with a qualified professional for your own legal or financial matters. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of the importance of protecting your own legacy and the memories of those you love, please take a moment to like this video. Your support helps us reach more people who might need to hear this message of justice. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel, Elderly Stories. We strive to bring you tales of resilience, of wisdom, and of the strength that only comes with time and experience. Do you have a story about a family inheritance, or a time when the truth finally came to light for you? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one of them, and your experiences mean a great deal to this community. Thank you for spending your time with me today. May your home be a place of peace, and may your legacy be one of truth and love. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. Goodbye for now.